and not Russell doing the intro. It was an experience.
You do it so much better.
It was such an experience when you did it, so it's just lovely. But you
I know
guys
Fern held her head when I did it because it was so bad and non-energetic.
Oh my goodness. Well, you guys are listening to Author Talk with me, Amy, Russell, and Fern today. It is just us so far. So you guys, let's talk about the weekend. Okay, my kids were off for spring break, so it was like a giant weekend. I had my niece came, and then my brother-in-law came, and then yesterday was our first day. Yesterday was our first day without anybody. But the kids just played and everything, and then it got cold, so we couldn't go outside or the splash pad or anything like that. But it was just, fun. The kids had some time off and everything, so it was, fun. Josh was gone on a work trip the first half of it, so we partied and did all kinds of fun stuff. An update on Sandy, because I know everybody watching knows Sandy, so she is doing good. She's just really tired. She's 2 weeks down into her treatment, but she is holding strong and doing wonderful. So that is the Sandy update. I have discovered Doggyland, Snoop Dogg Doggyland, which is always so much fun. So that's kind of just what I've been doing. So Fern, what did you do this weekend?
Wait, before Fern goes, tell the audience what Snoop Doggland is. What the hell is that?
Oh, you guys, Doggyland is Snoop Dogg's YouTube channel for kids, okay? And I am 30. I'll be 31 this year, and I'm digging it. So they have affirmations, kid nursery rhymes, all of these things. And I have been playing the affirmations for my kids, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. So let's talk about our weekends, and then I'll play the first part of the affirmations for you guys to hang out with. And Jake Brown is joining us. So, hey, Jake, how are you?
Hello.
Hey, Jake.
Good morning. How are y'all doing?
We are doing good. We're just talking about our weekend. So, Fern, tell us what you did this weekend.
Not much, actually. Not much. See, I was going to be so productive. I had this huge plan for spring break. I was going to do so much writing, so much work. I was going to get so much done. And yeah, I binge watched Star Wars instead. Like I literally, I did it all in chronological order. All the movies, all the shows. I mean, I spent the entire week a couch potato watching Star Wars. That's pretty much what I did. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, it took all the way through this weekend because, there's just so much of it.
Hey,
but I have to say it was a lot of fun because you see a lot of connections. Like you see how they're tying things together and the little, way that they're kind of meshing everything. And it's nice. I had a lot of fun. I highly suggest it if you want to be completely unproductive. You can do that.
See, I'm a Star Wars fan. Okay, Sky's middle name is Rey. If she was a boy, it was going to be Skywalker.
That's because you gave your daughters hippie names.
I did not.
Jake, her daughters' names are like Mountain Sunshine and what?
They are not. That is so rude, Russell. That is so rude. So rude. Feel free to make fun of Russell back because he likes banter and all those things. My kids' names are not. They are Meadow and Sky with an E. They're not super hippie names by any means. They are unique names. I didn't want them to have the same names as a kid in the classroom. But Sky, if she was a boy, I was going to name her Skywalker because I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And instead
Thank God she wasn't a boy.
Russell, I did Sky Ray because I was watching the newer ones, and Ray was the main character, and I loved it. And so I have that, and the spelling of her name is R-E-Y, which is unique. So that's just the story of, I guess, my hippie children's names. Jake, that is way more information than you needed to know. But
I was just thinking, we have a science fiction edition that we're working on right now, and we have a lot of the Star Wars writers: Claudia Gray, Kevin Scott. We have James Caan that novelized Return of the Jedi in the 80s, and there's others we just added. But it's interesting. I grew up a purist of Star Wars, and I have no problem defending that. In the fact that the first three movies, which I guess are 4, 5, and 6, at my age, I'm 46, so I was a child in the 80s. So that's hard for me to replace. And the good, the ones that came out in the early millennium were okay, because you were like, all right, they're telling the original story, but the CGI wasn't where it is now. So to your point, I feel like I don't necessarily love where they've taken everything, but I respect. I mean, Industrial Light and Magic has come, which is George Lucas's production company that copyrights, trademarks, owns, develops, finances. They have their own bank. They pay for all of this, and then they have proprietary use of it in their movies, and it's amazing because you see stuff you won't see in any other film universe because they were developing all of it with that original thread in mind. What did you all think about this Luke Skywalker being a grumpy old man, and then
that's the big conversation, right? Because it actually does make sense if you think about, especially now that they're connecting the dots with the Mandalorian, the way that he's coming out in the Mandalorian and Boba Fett. Luke sort of lost his way because the reason that Luke was successful in the original movies is because he was connected to Leia and he was connected to Han and the friendships and the attachments, right? The healthy attachments. And so he started trying to go all Jedi code, which I feel is like the big thing that has destroyed the Jedi continuously is this lack of proper balance in your emotions. You trying to be so perfect that you can't do it, and you certainly can't do things alone. You need healthy attachments and coalitions and unity. So yeah, I think they're kind of beginning with the Mandalorian to sort of connect those dots to what happened. But I also feel like, Luke's failure was so much worse than any before because he didn't just lose an apprentice to the dark side. He lost his nephew. He destroyed his sister's marriage. He lost his best friend. I mean, his failure was so intense, it was terrible. But I do love that when he returned to the Force, when he realized his mistake, the Force was with him 100%. There was no oh, you got to atone now, you got to redeem yourself and earn it back. He opened himself back to the Force and he Force projected himself across the galaxy, So I was like, ooh, that's awesome.
Couldn't an argument have been made, though, that had they gone a more conventional route for the sake of argument and had Rey find him and then him train her, and then we'd get to see a whole arc where he's like Yoda kind of training his redemption, then she goes and still beats the guy anyway. But he could have had a more I don't know, man. For those of every single person I know that grew up watching those movies hates that movie. They love the first one. The what is the one where she is on Tatooine herself, and then she has her own journey, and at the same time, drivers. The Force Awakens. That was a really cool movie with a lot of promise. But anyhow, I mean, who cares what I think? 1 billion people saw it, but it's worth debate, I guess, from the purists of us who grew up in the first era.
The reason they didn't have him do that is because I think that one of the big thematic pieces of that trilogy is this idea that even if all the Jedi were extinguished, there were no masters, the Force would raise up Jedi. Because if you think about it, they sort of imply that the Force was somehow talking to some of these stormtroopers who made the choice not to kill people and such. So I feel like that was a big thematic thread.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why they didn't have him necessarily train her,
What was up with the overactor of the century moron too that they had playing the guy who was doing those over dramatic speeches about how they were going to destroy everything and the spaz. This guy was a freak. I mean, I'm sorry, he's maybe a good actor, but you want the reminiscence of the kind of remember in Empire that Strikes Back, Vader would just kill off, "You are now the new admiral," or "You are now the new," but. it seemed like there was still kind of a regalness to those guys. They were all, you know, kind of even keeled, and they just sort of followed orders and were afraid of the emperor. This guy, and then to be fair too, I also this is just one opinion. I thought the big goon that they picked to be the before they revealed that the emperor was still alive. Who the heck was that guy? I mean,
oh
it was
yeah,
like,
that's what I'm hoping that they will fill in the gap, because like, where did this dude Snoke's come from? Now, true, when we first met everything, the emperor appears, but we know it's an empire, right? I mean, the setup is that it's an empire. But yeah, I'm all like, where did this dude come from? You know, who is this dude? I hope that they will fill in the gaps as they are moving through the series. But my all-time favorite Vader line is, the emperor is not as forgiving as I am.
Oh, yes, good.
I love that line because, like, dude, he killed how many admirals did he kill in the middle of that movie? It was great. I mean, he just, and I do feel like Vader has a point in that staff meeting where he almost chokes that one dude. It's like, sometimes you feel that way. I mean, you really do. Like, can I just force choke some of my, you know?
And when is Anakin Skywalker going to get his own the guy that played him, Christian, whatever his name is, from the Cadenson? When are we going to get like an adult Darth Vader that they show all these other characters? Why don't they give, like they gave Han Solo a movie? Give Vader his own movie, because I bet you it'd be the best-selling one of all of them, especially if they didn't screw it up, you know? I
think that now that the Disney leadership has changed, they've announced they're going to do fewer Star Wars off stories, not more.
Yeah,
that's what they said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they should make shows now too, right? I mean, they have all this TV shows where they can flesh a lot of that out without having to spend the same money, I suppose, that they would on a movie.
Yeah, I mean, the Ben Kenobi series was really good. Like, I really enjoyed seeing that and seeing their confrontation again. And, you know, but I do agree that a Vader movie would be awesome. Oh my God, they would make so much money.
Well, and it would give closure to people who felt a little ripped off by, like, for instance, Jar Jar Binks is universally, I think, panned. Everyone agrees this shouldn't have been in there. They could have a similar thing they could have like a thing where Jar Jar gets like captured and put in some kind of a torture camp, and then I'm joking, but like, for those of us who can't stand him, but no, I mean, they could go back, and it wouldn't be revisionist history, but they could do in the series, they could explain some of the things with Darth Vader as to what made him such an angry, you know, jerk. You understand a little bit of it because he lost Palpatine, or whatever her name is. What's the Natalie Portman? Matt Padme. You're the resident expert, obviously. Amy, do you have a favorite Star Wars?
I don't really know. I like the old school ones, like the ones that the very first ones that kind of tell that story before they do, like, you know, the prequels or whatever to it, because I grew up on those movies. But to be quite honest, and I don't know if you guys are gonna like this or not, but that's okay. We don't have to talk about it. It's totally okay. I am more of a James Bond fan, like Sean Connery, Roger Moore. That's kind of my realm. I grew up on those, Die Hard, you know, those kind of movies. When I was pregnant with Sky, I watched every single James Bond movie. I bought them all because I was like, this is what I want to watch. And I went on this whole binge of it before I watched the Star Wars. So I'm more in that realm. That's my happy spot. Besides the new ones, I'm not a huge fan of the new ones. But, you know, the old school classic Star Wars, the OGs, are my happy spot, I would say.
You know what's really awesome about those original movies is that, in spite of the fact that there was really no technology at all, you know, very little technology to make them, they really stand up well. I mean, you look at them, and yes, they've been remastered a little bit, but honestly, like, even if you go back and look at some of the very first ones, like, you know, those of us who have copies of the very first ones on VHS, you know, they look good. The special effects, kudos to that, because, you know, with very little tech, they did an amazing job that still looks magnificent, you know, today.
Yeah, I love those for sure. I'm an old school at heart, I guess. I like things back in there, not so much the recent things and stuff like that. But Russell, did you do anything this weekend? I know you didn't watch Star Wars.
I did not watch Star Wars. I actually found a pool hall in Atlanta. I accidentally came across one where serious gambling pool players go. And I was a little bit spellbound by it. Hung out to watch the body language and to watch the show. And to listen to the conversation. It was quite a home run for me. It made my whole weekend. I just accidentally came into this place, and then I just kept going back to the back till I found where the pool tables are and these players were, and it was packed. And all these guys had brought their own sticks, and they had gloves, their little glove things, and there wasn't a lot of laughing and smiling.
They were serious. Yeah. They had their own gloves and everything. They were serious.
The little gloves, yeah, it was crazy.
Gonna go make their money. Okay, nice. I like it. Jake, what about you? What did you do this weekend?
Oh, didn't I do? I work 7 days a week with my show and then the books that I write. About the Authors TV, I film on Sundays. We have a set not far from here. I do my Zooms here, but then I go there and film. And we've been patiently awaiting our streaming network, TUBI TV, to begin airing seasons 3 and 4, which are 68 new authors. And at the same time, I just got confirmation of our Tuesday meeting with HarperCollins, knock on wood, for Teddy Riley's book, which, if anyone does not know, Teddy Riley invented a genre of music called the New Jack Swing, out of which came Bobby Brown and all kinds of Keith Sweat and Kool Moe Dee and Big Daddy Kane and Michael Jackson's Dangerous album and all that and so forth. The past 8 years, we have been off and on writing it, and it's finally coming into line where hopefully it's going to get a great publisher. There's a tour coming up for it. There's going to be billboards all over the place, these electronic billboards advertising it and all this stuff. So when you're a biographer, I don't know how y'all's processes work, but your hats you wear are many with a entertainer, because you're dealing with like their management, the publisher, rewriting stuff from third person to first person, blah, 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 blah. So, my weekends are kind of like my non-week work week so that I can get ready for the next week. But it's great because we're really excited, and hopefully that book's going to finally be on store shelves. As y'all know, I'm sure, like, these days, I'm 50 plus books and 25 years in, and every time I get a new book contract, I feel just as grateful as the first one. And every time I finally go and, if you work on these things for so many years, you go and see it on a bookstore shelf, feel equally as grateful, because there is so much great competition from a lot of these younger generations. Publishers are as equal to invest in younger biographers as they are older ones, because they know they're going to be potentially, a source of books for many years more to come. So, I'm just kind of right in the heart of launching. We're also finishing a science fiction edition and a UK edition for the show. So just lots going on. But it sounds like I wish I could have been binge watching, maybe not all of the Star Wars, but the Godfather series, except the third one. Isn't it funny how we can selectively forget certain books and series or movies and series if we desire to? Like, I only acknowledge the first 3 Star Wars, honestly, at heart, as just a kid, to protect the innocence of it for me. But certain book series, like, you may have 10 books and you like 5 of them, and you really don't like 2, and you maybe sort of like 3. So you just read the ones after you've already read it that you want to read over again that you like. That's the free choice of a consumer, I guess. But Russell, do you run into that?
I'm like a Dune guy. So I've read all 35 books, but there's only 10 of the books that 30 from the whole series and the side authors and the sons and everything. But there's only like 3 books, just as you said, like God Emperor. That's my book. That's the book that I go back to. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Frank Herbert originals.
Yeah. Right.
We had a really extensive episode in season 1 or 2 with Kevin Anderson, and he talked about writing all of those with the son, and it's fascinating to listen to. But I think there's a purity in that's kind of great for certain people that that did really, like, you look back on your childhood and you have certain things that were out of your control. Like I moved schools 5 times. So I don't look back on my schooling experience with any love. I just look back on it as something that I was happy to, to navigate and lucky to go to, public school finally. But where I could go get all of the books that I wanted to read, put them behind the textbook in the back of the class, and the teacher's like, you quiet in the back reading, don't worry about it, do what you want. But I remember with great love things like James Bond wise Timothy Dalton, who I'm not gonna put him. Pierce Brosnan, we can all kind of agree, was kind of, but I mean, you can go to Sean Connery or Roger Moore or Timothy Dalton for the couple movies, and of course the steel-eyed guy that does them now, that's amazing, that just finished his run. Who's the guy that's been James Bond the last 20 years?
Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig. Yeah. I mean, you can look at those books and be like, those movies. And I think, except for, no offense to Pierce Brosnan, but as the 90s kind of got into that Joel Schumacher swanky show tune kind of era where it wasn't just the pure violence and sort of spy stuff and all the cool gadgets and inventions. That's just, of course, my opinion, but it's awesome to watch James Bond movies because you can find your little corner and stay there. And that's what's so probably cool about franchises, is that we don't all have to love everything. Just like sports teams you don't have to always love every, year that, or maybe era of that team or whatever it might analogously be. But yeah.
Oh yeah. And really with James Bond, what I like about the Daniel Craig era is that you see a little bit more human character. He's much more like conflicted. He has a fear of when he's going into things and stuff. He's not such a superhero-y type character, which is much more true to the character in the books, because the books are magnificent. I mean, they're just beautifully written, beautifully described. And I think Daniel Craig is a little bit closer to the James Bond of the books than the James Bond of the superhero kind of Roger Moore era type, or even the swanky Sean Connery. I mean, Sean Connery was beautiful.
That's what I'm saying. The swag, though, like the confidence and the swag that they had when they just like entered a room, and like it was just, oh man, like those two for me. I mean, Sean Connery was, for that time period was a bit rough, but other than that, I mean, it's just one of those things where the swag and all of it, I'm just like, oh man, and the way that they dress, it just was, I just wish I was in that time period. I'm just like, oh man, it just. You can't recreate those things, it just takes me back. That's why those are my favorite. But I haven't really seen any of the Daniel Craig ones, to be honest. I know Skyfall, I was told, is like one of his best
amazing.
Ones.
It's
it's the best
amazing.
one that he's done. So I might dive into that one this weekend. I'm not gonna lie though, this weekend is a John Wick weekend because I'm going to see John Wick 4.
Oh yeah, I'm pumped about John Wick 4.
Yeah, I'm telling you, that is my movie. Like, I know my kids are younger, so if that movie comes on, I pause it and I find something for my kids to do so I can watch it, because that is just, I feel like, I was talking to my husband the other day and I told him, I said, if anyone came after my kids or my dog, I would go John Wick on them. I totally would, like 100%. I was like, if it was you, maybe, but my kids or my dog for sure. You're questionable, you're questionable.
Isn't it cool that Keanu Reeves got to make a comeback like this too, this late in his career? I mean, you don't see that with everybody, and he did it by really getting his ass kicked. He said he really liked the hardest movies he's physically made, more than The Matrix or Point Break or any of those, was this series, because he was in his 50s when he started making it. I mean, it's pretty cool.
They're so great. So I'm so excited.
He does look good. But
I know, I'm excited for Friday.
Going to you were talking a little bit about what you're working on, and you are a biographer. That is what your focus is as a writer. And so I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to be a biographer? What made you go, oh, that's what I want to write? How did that happen?
Quite accidentally. Quite accidentally. Yeah. I'll give the very quick 2-minute, if at best elevator version speech of this. So basically, I'm a by ear musician of 6, 7 instruments. As a kid, I was a musician and songwriter and in bands. And at the same time, I read Mansion on the Hill and Hitman and Billboard every week and Rolling Stone every week and Rap Beat and just grew up in the 1980s. So music was like a 3D experience. You had MTV, you had tapes, you had vinyl, you had CDs, you had all of the Walkman. It was a full-time thing. So I just moved to Los Angeles at 21 and got a band together and got a job at a label and figured, okay, I'm just going to work in the record business, which I've done the last 25 years. But I started writing a lot of copy for like catalog. Then they put me on press releases. Then they put me on so I could write. And I'd always written, but I'm not trained in it. I have no formal training of any kind as a writer. But I read, and as everybody knows, the best students are other writers and to read them. And that's the best way to learn in any genre. So anyway, that's what I read growing up, were music biographies. So it was just default. And then I met a publicist named Marcy Northrup in 2000, and she made a bet with me that I could write a book. And I said, I don't think I can. I don't really want to. And she said, if I could find you a contract, will you write it? And she already had the contract and already had the band. And they were a really, really bad 80s band. I, in my opinion, love them. But Nelson was kind of like, with ugly, the very end of the 80s when grunge was about to take over. And I said, if I'm going to launch a literary career of any kind, it's not going to be on that book. But Marion Suge Knight, I grew up on Dr. Dre very heavily and Death Row Records, right as it was. In fact, I'm writing a book with Corrupt right now. And I have the only book with the TUPAC Shakur estate, Tupac in the studio, that chronicles the Death Row years. But anyway, he was getting out of prison. And it was much more interesting to me to write a real-time account of Death Row, the good, bad, and ugly. Had not been a book done on it that was honestly a real account. It was all this anonymous sources. And I don't do any anonymous sources in my books. I don't believe in it. And so, and I'm not a journalist, never have been, don't want to be, no offense to people who are. I think it's a brilliant profession. It's just, I like things on the record completely. So I wrote what I felt was like an honest account of what Suge Knight had done, taking the same tactics white record label owners used to victimize black artists for decades, and flipped it on its head and put it on corporate white America and kicked the door open for Sean Combs and Jay-Z and Master P and Kanye before he went crazy. And, all of the other people that now are kind of marquee entrepreneurial touchstones in the sort of African-American hip hop explosion that was so needed and overdue. But that book wound up selling. Amber Books bought it. And then it became it kind of was unexpectedly a hit, and I got a bunch more contracts writing these mass market hip hop paperbacks. And then finally Tupac's mom gave me a shot with authorizing that book. And then Anna Nancy Wilson, I pitched one to them, and this In the Studio series developed. And because I'm a record producer as well, I shifted to then writing more about the making of records. Behind the Board started, I interviewed I've got all the record producers from the rock eras all in that series. Hal Leonard bought that, which then became these publishers buy all these, so it's hard for me to know who's what now. And then that led to Nashville Songwriter, which you see behind me there, working with Lemmy Kilmister from MOTORHEAD on an In the Studio book. Tori Amos, Rick Rubin's book was not authorized but approved, and Tilly came out with his, was the only one. So I got lucky with a lot of early placements that I picked people that are like I grew up on, and luckily the 80s produced all these people and no one else is writing about them. So I got fortunate to do that. JOE SATRIANI and I connected in 2011, and we wrote his memoir, musical memoir, Strange Beautiful Music, which was a life-changing book. Nashville Songwriter began after that. So the two kinds of things I do are biographies, authorized memoirs. Teddy Riley as an example that's coming up. And then I do series that are like trademarks, like I own some dumb luck reason no one had In the Studio. I said, you got to be kidding me. So I trademarked that. I trademarked Nashville Songwriter. No one else had that. So you get dumb luck sometimes where you run into a title, as you all know. You come up with a great title and 8 other people have it. And then if you can take a title and franchise it out over a bunch of sort of like a series would be connected, but you could read them as standalones kind of thing. And I ripped that model off, of course, from the, it's a widely used one. A lot of success for any authors. I'm sure you all have known, if there's aspiring ones that watch your show, which I'm sure there are many. It's a combination of a lot of really hard work and always be writing, and then a lot of luck, right? Because you can have the wrong agent or the wrong publisher, or the right agent and the right publisher, or one or the other, so it just sort of rolled like that. Beyond the Beats is a rock drummer series. I interview all the big rock drummers. In fact, we're, knock on wood, we're working on Mick Fleetwood right now. But yeah, so it just kind of, and I'm a workaholic, you know, so I just kind of, I love what I do, and I haven't had a day job in 24 years. And, you know, I get to wear flip-flops in the morning when I sit down and hang out with my dog. And so, you know, you do 20-hour days, but you're doing what you love. And and I'm also with the show about the Authors TV, which I launched, kind of came out of a 50th book campaign in 2020 off of COVID. On Zoom, I said, God, this is amazing. Now I can actually interview. And of course, this is something that Amy was doing, and a lot of people got really smart within podcasts. We wanted to do something in streaming television because there's not a show like that. So yeah, 700 authors later, we're like, we've got 54 in the first 2 seasons, 68 in the second 2. And they just keep growing when I find people that want to talk. And I just am lucky. I'm in a 3rd decade in this thing. And I work as hard as though it was my first book or my first anything. And I just feel like every day that you don't do that, unless you worked hard and you get to binge a weekend watching Star Wars, which probably in the subconscious is creatively inspiring, I'd expect too. I'm
totally counting it as writing work. I consider that as having been writing work, because that's my genre, right? Sci-fi, fantasy. So yes, you know, I was taking notes. So you were mentioning the streaming service, and your
our network,
interview. Yeah. And it's interesting because your biographies are about, you know, musicians and the music business, and then you kind of went into like interviewing authors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you kind of just really quickly went through that, but like, what made you decide to go in that direction for your podcast rather than maybe, you know, interviewing musicians and things like that?
Yeah. We didn't want to, in great respect and deference to the podcast community. This is not it's a TV show. It's not a podcast. And I distinguish the two because I really think it's important to respect the domain of podcasts. Whereas in the streaming space, there was very little to no content supporting authors of any kind. Any kind. So my agent, I'm very blessed to be represented by Frank Wyman, and I went to him and I pitched this idea, and I said, I'm going to finance this with my royalty checks. I write for about 20 publishers over there, so I get royalty checks, but instead of living on them, I put them all into this, and I ghostwrite as well a little bit, so that helps pay for it. But I just started taking all the record business stuff and transferring it to this because I had done a bunch of these talking head. Like I'm lucky to get sometimes asked, like I'm sure y'all are, to do like TV things. So Music's Greatest Mysteries. So I'm sort of a rock historian. So I hate that word. It's for people who really are, but I'm in that arena. So I was doing that for a couple of seasons, and I was doing some of these Breaking the Bands, and I narrated the Death Row Chronicles, which was the whole Suge B.E.T thing on Suge and Death Row. And you know, all the people that were like the stars would go off to the green room. I just want to hang out talk to the grips and talk to the directors and ask what this does and how that. So I'm just much more of a student of this stuff because how often you get to be in those environments, you know? So it's like any author that gets a book adapted and you get to be on set. Mostly you're smart, you shut up and you listen and watch. And if they ask you a consulting question or they're butchering your character, speak up maybe. But anyway, so yeah, so it just kind of it just translated over, and there was nothing in the streaming space on any of those networks other than maybe like a documentary on one author. And we watched during COVID as all these news networks, good, bad, and whatever, had the crystal clear 4K picture here and the Zoom here. Now you see how Zooms have gotten, but I was like, why do the news get to do it and the rest of us not? So then the concept was, I'll have a crystal clear 4K set. It's a lockout. We have bookshelves. It's a whole thing. And then we'll do everything on Zoom. And then I have 3 editors, and we just put together what we did. And then luckily we needed a streaming network to pick it up. And originally Hulu was maybe going to do it. And then Amazon was maybe going to do it. And then Bezos put a ban on nonfiction content submittals in the summer of 2020, after all the kind of inspired right-wing, really right-wing and really left-wing kind of factions were doing a lot of these self-produced propaganda documentaries. And smartly, they cut that off. So TUBI, like, love them, stepped in and saw something originalist. And so anyway, they picked it up, and we're 2 million viewers in under a year and a half and counting. And we have teenagers that watch the show. I'd love to talk to both of y'all about at some point coming on. I mean, when it works, but we have 700 authors that I've interviewed in the last 2 years and counting. And Yeah, so I interview authors all week, and it's amazing. I'm not religious, but it's like miraculous in the use of that word of the education I get. And then hopefully, I mean, you all know this is a solitary profession. I mean, with Zoom, at least we're able to talk to each other, but you spend so much time alone in like a room or whatever your variation of that is. And then you go out and you promote it, and then you're back in there, and maybe by email or, whatever, Facebook, which is dwindling obviously, but there's other formats like Twitter, post-Trump Twitter, and Instagram and others that are kind of, but so anyway, yeah, the show's been a gift. And when you're a third decade into a career, you just try to keep grinding, like all of us, right? In writing. So it's the same principle. I just apply it there.
So what's your favorite interview that you've done with an author? What's your favorite one? Or is it difficult to narrow it down? Like there's
I can't pick that out. We've talked to everybody from Joyce Carol Oates and Erica Jong, and I was raised by a feminist. So my mom, I mean, there were books like Fear of Flying and Naomi Wolf and all these authors that, Melody Beattie, and just these sort of authors that were incredibly influential in those arenas all the way across the line. To the first 2 seasons, I think we were very lucky because in 2020, everybody was doing anything pretty much that came in. So we probably got lucky with like the Brad Meltzers or the Sue Monk kids or these kinds of authors that Scott Turow, that I targeted like I would have an entertainment thing, just top. And then I don't say down, I just mean you're going to get some targets in that arena that are going to help you get credibility with other authors. And I built it off of that. And I when I'm not writing or editing, I'm emailing authors or I'm dealing with the publicists and who are great, but that requires some finessing. And we're just hopefully going to continue, kind of building the goal is to build the biggest streaming archive of episodic author interviews ever assembled. So that whether, like, for instance, we have F. Lee Bailey's last interview before he died. I have Charles and Caroline Todd with Caroline's last interview before she passed away. There are other authors who are going. James Lee Burke gave us a wonderfully, exhaustively, in a great way, long interview. Jung Chang. I'm constantly trying to kind of balance both ends of revered, wonderful authors that are kind of maybe retired. Like John Saul came out of retirement to do it. But you get such wisdom. I have such reverie for the fact that, someone can be in their 80s and banging out a new book, and it's just no excuse to anyone who's like, oh, I just can't get it out of my head. And that's the other thing we try to do is, as y'all know, there's no such thing as writer's block. It's a myth. If this isn't working, you go to the next character, you go to the next chapter, you go to the next point of view, or start another book.
Or like what I always like to say, if you're stuck, throw in a dragon. That'll unstuck you.
Right. But well, Russell, do you find, I mean, in your experience when you're writing, I mean, isn't it pretty much, you've been doing it a long time. I mean, there's just no excuse. If you're going to make a living doing it and you're going to take on a contract from a publisher, you can't call them up and go, guys, I'm really sorry, but I just can't figure out. I mean, you talk to a great editor. Hopefully you have a good editor. You have tools, but
right. Hemingway said, just write one good word, then write one more word, then write another word. Now you're going. I mean, that's what Hemingway said.
Nora Roberts has a really great quote too. But I think it is that you can't do anything with a blank page. That's probably been said in variations by other authors. But the Bible of wisdom that's in that those interviews, and it's not because I'm saying anything holy about us, but just about what these wonderful minds share. The goal here is that I used to get asked to do these things. I'm sure y'all did, where we would go and we'd get to talk to like classes and stuff, or kind of talk about with these young kids that are learning to write. I have cousins that did like 3 or 4, even some of them all 4 years at college, either with this or partly from home or with like lecture halls that couldn't be full. Or so the other goal is to, on a nerdy kind of level, is to really try to help create like podcasts and everything is just a wealth of like knowledge. So if you don't like romance, skip it. We have every genre. If you don't like action or, thriller, go to romance. You want historical, you want nonfiction, whatever it is. Whatever your genre, the best advice you're going to get is from those creators.
I frankly have enjoyed. Amy did a whole season of romance writers that we interviewed last year. I actually enjoyed it because they have a whole different set of problems than other writers, and they want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I find comedy in the stories, like Catherine Coulter, which was one of the wonderful authors who signed on for the first 2 seasons. She's talked about reading this romance and throwing it across the room and saying, I can do better than that. Her husband said, try. And there's others I can point to, many. We talked to many, and it's not doing it. That's the regret that they would have always had. And here they're looking like, so to not do it is like basically betraying your own kind of, your own aspiration, inspiration, ambition, whatever it is. But to try and then to listen to them talk about this climb and then the falls and then the climbs, it really, really is amazing because in 25 years, I had a year in 2014, Satriani and Nashville Songwriter came out the same year. I had more of the kind of press authors want for their books than I'd ever had. CBS News, Billboard, Rolling Stone, Hollywood Reporter, whatever it is. I couldn't sell a book in 2015 to save my life. I mean, it was hilarious. And I'd go, and it wasn't like I had an ego about it. I just had good books. I had Kenny Aronoff, Mellencamp Fogerty drummer, and we had Bon Jovi and Melissa Etheridge and John Fogerty and all these amazing people in that, Billy Corgan and on and on. And that's the type of book that normally a music publisher would just be like, yeah, we want that. It took us 2 years to sell that. We finally sold it, but it was like so you can get over exposure to in a small period and think that you're set. And then find that it's going to be a couple years, and so I can commiserate too with not on the levels of a lot of the people that I speak to, but who've been doing it many, many decades, or who are the big things right now. But like Riley Sager's a great example. He was telling me about his first era. Melanie Benjamin, I talked to you last week, same thing. She had to reinvent. I think the reinvention process as an author is really an important thing, and it's not talked about enough. It's not honestly explored enough, and so the more dialogue we have about that, the more young authors understand what they're in for, and that it's a job as much as there's a romantic, wistful, muse that is. I do believe in the muse. I just think that you can't say, well, the muse isn't here today. It's like saying the sun's not out. We still gotta, go drive to whatever we gotta go drive to. And if you have a high functioning.
What you were saying about reinventing, you see that a lot of authors sometimes try to do that, like with Stephen King. He has been labeled as a horror author. He has so many other genres that he writes, and a lot of people just sort of only think of him as this one space, and he has so many others. So sometimes branding can become so intense that you can't quite break out of it, which I think happens also to movie stars, where, they take on an iconic role and they sort of embody it, and then it's like they're stuck there. So I think that even in writing, you sometimes see this sort of situation happen.
Yeah, I had a really, really pair of interesting conversations. They're both for upcoming seasons 5, 6. Gillian Flynn, we were honored to be one of 4 things, and I only mention that because you get those opportunities, you're proud of them. But she was doing a 10-year Gone Girl thing, and I was lucky, and I tried to really prep for it. But the main message I got out of that, along with Attica Locke, who works on Empire and other shows, and of course a wonderful author herself, is when they had the opportunity and felt confident creatively that they could handle it, and these adaptation opportunities came along, they were like, I don't want to just be the executive producer and based on my book. They wanted to either be involved or script it themselves, which is a bold thing, right? But once they pulled that off, it gave them other options in terms of the avenues in which they could write, create revenue and royalty streams, meet new potential creative collaborators or people that would option other things of their work. So when you talk about branding, that's the other thing that we really hammer on the show. There's an entrepreneurial side to being a successful author, that whether you're a business idiot or you're somebody that can learn in time, you have to get the people around you who are smart enough to make up for your, everyone has sort of strengths and deficits, right? Like, so I've run 3 small businesses for 25 years. So and I've read every contract there is and written a lot of them sort of in lieu of, so I have a bit of a sense, but I'm not going to be dumb and go, hey, if we get that Harper deal, Frank, I'll just look my contract over, or, hey, I want to chime in on the negotiate. I'm going to shut up and let him go do his job. If I have a publicist who needs to talk to a media person, I'm not going to CC in on it and waste their time with 3 extra stupid emails that they didn't need to get, where they're probably going to get not interested in booking me versus interested in booking me. If I'm safe for any author, social media, there's engagement and there's over engagement. There's like Beto O'Rourke into the pool where he's like, hey, look, I'm at the dentist and here's the floss in my gums and stuff, where you're like, and then there's the really cool kind of smart, tactful fan base serving kind of ways that are templated now. So there's no way to not look at any author, go to Twitter and look at the amount of people that follow and are following. Look at the people that you can see are actively every day engaged with that particular author. That's a relationship with a reader that was impossible outside of a book signing once a year, years ago. And I talk to a lot of authors that complain about it. And I delicately, I don't try to counter them, but I just sort of maybe try to make the point that when I'm asked an opinion about it, that this is what's required in 2020s in the visual age of digital to have fans. They want to read your book and they want to get to know you, but the demands of it are just gargantuan. Not so much say for me, because the great thing about the show is, because if you look at my Twitter account, it's like every 6 months by force of my publisher, I'd have to put something up. I'm on that Twitter account every day for About the Authors TV, because I just don't, I'm the small name and then there's the big artist. I never got into this to be like, you know, so but I love being able to engage with people who watch the show or with the authors we have on, because then I'm engaging with their fan bases, which is more potential viewers. So you have to think entrepreneurially in the 2020s if you want to be an author. And I run into this on the other end of the spectrum. And I say this, when I say this, I mean it like y'all would. You want to book someone who's, you know, up here. I have an easier time forwarding an email to them through somebody else that I might ask to do that for me than I would going through the red tape, 8-layer thick PR aspect sometimes of getting to them. On the other hand, sometimes it's better to respect that chain of command and not jump the gun, because you might get that one author, but burn yourself, as I have personally done and had to really work to make up for it with another publicist that would have given me 10 more. So there's a real kind of balance. And for an author, I think you just have to be realistic to the fact that you have to spend time on social media. Because what I'm getting to is some of the bigger authors that I talk to, they kind of abhor that the way record producers I interview here lambast digital, because they pine for analog when they had $1 million budgets instead of $100,000 budgets, and all these sort of little things, the ancillary things. But yeah, older authors too have had to get older, meaning longer in their career, have had to get much more engaged on social media too, which might mean hiring a social media person. So there's like a give and a take, I think, to being an author these days with a fan base, because they want more of you. They want to talk to you more. They want to learn. They want to hear how you came up with characters and on and on and on. Y'all know. I mean, you interview authors.
Right. So, Jake, I have to ask you a question before we go. Where do we find About the Authors TV?
Great question. You can go to any smart TV in any living room and put your little remote on that takes you to that central hub where they have all the streaming networks, and it says Hulu, Netflix, Crackle, whatever. Tubi's right there. You click on it, you type in About. You don't even have to write the Authors TV, and it'll bring up seasons 1 and 2 of the show. Within the end of March, we're expecting seasons 3 and 4 to begin airing. Our YouTube channel is also very centrally where we do promos, we do extended previews, we do sometimes early premieres. We rolled out Longmire creator Craig Johnson last Friday. We have Joe Pistone coming up this week, Donnie Brasco. My agent repped him. I was luckily able to get an audience with him. But if you're a mob movie fan, that one's I've got so you can go. Those two places are the main places to go, YouTube and Tubi and Twitter, I guess, if you're interested in following us, where I most actively engage. I find Facebook, I don't know about y'all, but if I bring 1,000 people over there and then they want to charge me to reach them all, I'm not going to pay for that, because I feel like the contract is there that they're getting to juice our information and everything else. So we shouldn't have to pay to reach our own readers or viewers. And that's, so Facebook's been frustrating, because I don't know if y'all have found that, because we can't, it's like terrifying to knock Facebook, but Twitter.
I think Facebook's about gone. I think it's on its way out.
Why would they charge you to reach your own readers?
It has its ups and downs. They're going through a lot of changes and things at the moment. But social media is another conversation in and of itself that we could dive into, and I would be more than happy to dive into that conversation. But before I get more of the time Nazi eye from Russell, we do have to close out, because Russell scares me, you guys. He straight up scares me. It's a good thing we're not in the same state right now.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a fun and wonderful conversation. We would love to have you back at a later date. But you guys, we hope you all have a fantastic Monday, a great rest of the week, and we will catch you all next Monday.